Okay. Greetings, everybody. Keith here. Hoping everybody's having a good day, enjoying life, living life, loving life. I want to remind everybody hit that like, share, and subscribe button. There is a PayPal link down below for anybody who wants to share some love. Every little bit is appreciated. And I'm supposed to have a special guest here tonight to talk about the Postal Service. Um, and he's going to talk to us about things he's done, firsthand experience as it relates to what I've put out there in information in the past in regards to this commercial and legal system and the transfer of a title. Expenses incidental to transfer of title to the agency, expenses incidental to transfer of title to the United States, and expenses incidental to transfer of title to the United States Postal Service. Now, these are all outlined in the U.S. Code and the Code of Federal Regulations. And that's the whole premise of the birth certificate, enumeration at birth, social security number assignment, and the capacities that are presumed that you're conducting your affairs in as if though you're a public official of some sort. And so it comes down to an identity and a purpose. So we'll see if he shows up. And if not, like I said, I've got the base premise that I've already worked up, if people that know me comprehend well enough, through the scriptures, what the scripture has led me to comprehend, and how it relates to the system that we're using as our societal backdrop and performance. And greetings, we have Yisay with us. Greetings, brother. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. Can you hear me?
Yep, we are well. We are well. I was just telling the people.
Hang on one sec, Keith.
Well,
apologies. He was asking me a question. I'm
okay.
gonna get into a safe space here where I could talk uninterrupted.
All right. And I was just basically explaining to the people the thing about the transfer of title and everything. And I was going to put it back on the foundational element of the scriptures. And one of my favorite scriptures is Jeremiah 1:5. And this is something that resounds with me throughout my entire learning of the scriptures. And that is, before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee. Before thou camest forth from the womb, I sanctified thee, and I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations. So this is when he imprinted the image and likeness, that basic identity, I am, and stated a purpose that's instilled through every last one of us. And that comes to that being able to pose that equal station in life. And that's what we're talking about. That equal station is the ability to have a post in life, whether it be a military post or what I'm pushing myself is a diplomatic post. And a diplomatic post, as I relate, is having the knowledge and etiquette of addressing our fellow man in the proper manner. In other words, we follow along by these titles and everything, and we really don't know what they mean, Mr., Mrs., this and that, and this legal construct. And so it comes down again to the transfer title to the proper people. And the enumeration at birth doesn't have it doesn't meet the requirements that it's supposed to have, where that birth is supposed to be registered in the United States. So that tells me there's supposed to be a transfer of some sort. And that's what we're going to discuss as it relates to that birth certificate, as well as other elements of the government instrumentalities. And so now I'm going to hand it over to Yisay, And I'm just going to give you the floor, brother, to explain from your perception what you're doing with the post as it relates to establishing your post office box, the entity, even selective service and stuff. I don't want you to show any documents or anything, but just your comprehension from your firsthand experience of actually initiating some of this documentation transfer and stuff.
All right. Well, first, I kind of stumbled upon these things by happenstance. I had a little bit of knowledge, but I wouldn't say that I really knew what I was doing. I was just kind of winging it, if you would say. And as I was going along, I just started making discoveries, and I prayed about it, and asked God to reveal the truth to me. And I started doing a lot of things, and at first I really thought I messed up, and then I realized that I was being guided in a way, and that God doesn't make mistakes. Man makes mistakes, but when you're fulfilling the purpose that was set out for you before you came here, and you align yourself with those things, I've come to find that, they just kind of fall in place. So that requires a walk in faith for starters, and you don't really walk in that faith, and those things are not really going to be presented to you in that way. You may stumble upon them, through your own due diligence and whatnot. But in my case, it was really this divine inspiration. And when I started, I was kind of reluctant about getting a post office box, but I just decided one day, it was time to get one. I went down and I started a P.O. box under business. And, I did surrender and a few other things. And then I started, I had a friend on Telegram, started talking about.
Hold on real quick here. When you say surrender, tell the people what you're talking about there.
Well, basically, in essence, gave back the warehouse receipts to who they belong to. Render under Caesar what is Caesar's. I'd heard, like everyone else that usually gets in this movement, you hear about authenticating birth certificates and all these things, but you don't really know what to do with them per se. So one day I was kind of just sitting in the living room at a friend's house, and I had all my paperwork spread out, and Spirit came over me and it said, you might want to go back and review Minnesota Rule 220. And at the time when someone had said it, brought that to my attention, I thought it really had something to do with the DBA per se. So, I went and did the DBA and all those things that kind of pertain to it. And then I just got to the point where I felt like I was wasting my time. And like I said, I was sitting in the living room on the floor and I had all my documents spread out, and it just said to me, hey, you might want to go back and look at Minnesota Rule 220 again. And, I kind of listened, and then it said it to me again. And I said, okay, right. Whenever it tells me something or, starts nudging me in a certain way more than once or twice, usually more than 2 times, I'm like, I pay attention. So I went and read it. And when I read it, I had just had this profound, it was like a light bulb went off in my head, because I'd read it before, but I didn't read it with eyes to really see or try to comprehend what it was saying. And it just basically said that the registrar of titles is open for any outstanding certificated certificate, quote, birth certificate, end quote, upon an affiant who is willing to state that they're familiar with the facts stated on said certificate and that they are one of the owners on it. And I said, well, I don't necessarily like that word owner. So I changed up the terminology a little bit and used trust terminology. And I used the word absolute grantee, right? Because I realized that I was in a trustee position and that I wanted to get out of this grantee position and move to the grantor position. So, I stayed away from the word owner because in the worldly terms, we can't really own anything. Everything belongs to God, right? And I wanted to kind of separate myself from that concept. So,
Correct.
I just kind of got, a little ballsy, and I said, all right, well, let's try it. So I wrote up an affidavit of what's called affidavit of personal knowledge, because in my state, in the birth registration handbook, it made specific, mention of this thing called an affidavit of personal knowledge, and it said, if you want to make any amendments, changes, or alterations, or etc., that this is how you do it. So, at the time, I'd been listening to someone who was always talking about how the birth certificate was, hearsay or triple hearsay, and that you had no firsthand knowledge, which was another deterrent that was kind of steering me away from the realization that I had at the time. And I went, wait a second, I don't need firsthand knowledge. I have knowledge of persons, places, and things, and all these things are listed right here on this document. And
Yep.
all I really need to do is just tell the story that has already been memorialized. So that's what I did. I went out, where it talks about in Joshua 50, to gather up all the birthright documents. And I just told a story that had already been told, of the attending physician and the certifier and my mother and father and the time and the place and the hospital, and what day it was and all these things. And I summed them up in a paragraph. And then in the process of doing that, I kind of had another realization that, if I was civilly dead, per se, and that the same civil law that put Jesus to the civil death that I'm basically under today, that I needed to do what Jesus basically did in essence, which was to resurrect myself from this civil death. And then it occurred to me, what was it that I could do to make that happen? And I said, well, it says in the scripture to be reborn of the Spirit. So,
Correct.
I equated that.
And real quick here, just to go right back, when it comes to the Norman Longstaff's comment, vital statistics is the holder of all security interests. That's that birthright in that enumeration at birth that we're talking about. And it's already been memorialized, but people interpret it wrong. So it's a matter of that's one of the elements we're surrendering is the error in the record to be corrected and stating our true declaratory capacity. We're not the instrument. We're not the person. We are the heir apparent, and it's our word that is bound. That's it. So we're just rearranging the binding and the people that it's bound with to uphold their duty to that person. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes perfect sense.
See, we're the ones that have been supposedly instructed how to run that person. And that's what the resurrection is. We're going to resurrect it, and we're going to run our own person and hand that one over to them. That's their person. That's the surrender. Surrender. They're two different words.
Oh,
Go
wow.
ahead, brother.
Wow, that's good insight right there. I never put that word in that context, so thank you for that.
Right. You're going to surrender. You're going to render a new surname. You're going to hand the other one to them.
Right. So we're giving back their title. So I just kind of equated with the resurrection part with baptism. So I got my baptismal certificate. I called my church and had them send me another one. So my second paragraph, in essence, was me being reborn of the Spirit, persons, places, and things, and times and events. And then in the third paragraph, which was very short, I basically said that I brought my two witnesses with me who would, attest or testify that they know me to be living and walk on the land. And then,
Right. That baptism, folks, was done in not your name, but in the name of Christ.
right. And so I brought my two witnesses on there, and and then I signed it, and I slapped my affidavit on my certificates, along with my baptismal certificate. And another part that really occurred to me was, I used to be a landman, so I really understood chain of title, from doing research and things of that nature. So I thought to myself, well, if we're going to have a chain of title here, maybe I should, try to perfect this title, at least the chain of title to the best of my ability. So I got online and I went and got my parents' marriage license, which was a bond that was put in place that predated, all of these other things. So I had my parents' marriage license. I went and got both of my certificates because in my state, they offer a long form and a short form. And then I went and got those fully authenticated on the state and the federal level. And so slapped in my baptismal certificate with it, along with my affidavit. And then I sent it to the last shall be the first. And then I wound up going to the other place, which just says that the first shall be the last. So what I mean by that is the chain of title of where it started from and the last place that it wound up at. Right.
Right. And that's the parent's estate, which is known by the last name, where they're both in one union, so it goes by the family name, which appears first.
Yes. And in the book, all right, and another keen reference that I found is when I went to my county of birth, I got to see the birth registration handbook, which is on the public side. They'll have books that start from 1973 to present. Anything before that has been archived. And you can find that. You would have to probably call the county and ask them where they keep the archive records. Well, come to find out, they keep they keep them in my county and another county over at a library. And so in this book, it said my last name was first, and then my first name and my middle name. And then they had a double book entry where it showed if you had a keen eye, you could see how they made reference to the day that it was that I was born, and then the third day, 3 days later, when it was registered. And I said,
Right.
"Oh, look, it says last name, first name, middle name," which only confirmed back to what I was saying about the last shall be the first, and the first shall be the last.
And that's the process known as posting. That's why the post office is so important. That process is known as posting, where they take private journal data, abstract it, and place it on a new form for legal or commercial purposes. And that's where you get the last and then the first. Because nobody announces themselves of the family Little. You can call me Keith. I'm Keith of the family Little. It's always been first and last.
Yep. So sometimes I say Jesse of Henley. Right. That's how I will say it. But
Right.
that separates the two.
And that comes from things like Jesus of Nazareth. And so a lot of times your lineage names are place names, like the Little Valley in Italy. So the last name Little in various different contexts of spelling generally comes from a place name, things like that.
Sorry if somebody was trying to speak to me while you were talking there. No, but I agree. And, the other part about this last shall be the first and the first shall be the last. So the last place that it was sent to is where I sent them to. Okay, so if you follow the chain of title, it goes from the hospital to the county, and then it goes to vital statistics. So that's who I sent them to. And I sent it
Right.
certified mail return receipt.
Right. See, vital statistics, I've done a few videos showing that. The vital statistics jurisdiction established when you're born, it's known as a state's vital statistics jurisdiction. That itself is what we're saying with the vital states health and human services is the holder of the record for the vital statistics, which is the regulation of the estate that was created upon enumeration at birth. It's a creature of the state and not of the family. So the family's estate is not supposed to be public to begin with. So it shouldn't be put out there in public. It should always, however, be maintained in private. And that's what most people lose, is that private education of protecting yourself in private contracting. And so we end up contracting with the state in all kinds of venues, driver's license, educations, any kind of business license, employment application, things like that. They're all indicative of government interactions.
They absolutely are. Well, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that you contract. I think that, once you do it in a general capacity, that's when you need to come back in and reappropriate those rights, titles, and interest accordingly. Because once you do that, now you've basically, in essence, because it's musical chairs. We have 3 chairs going on. In a trust, you have a grantor, you have a trustee, and a beneficiary. And somehow or another, just like when you go to court, they get you to take up the reign of trustee, and then the judge becomes the grantor or whichever, and then the state becomes the beneficiary. So it's okay to contract, but you have to learn how to reappropriate those rights, titles, and interests so that they become in your best interest instead of to your detriment.
Yeah, and that's the part about contracting. Contract is the law, and you have to understand contract, equal consideration and equal benefit. If you can't read a contract and see it for detriment to yourself, that's your problem. You need to see things that might be detrimental to you and be able to arbitrate that out of the contract so that it maintains the equal consideration for equal benefit. That's why these contracts come back to bite you and end up being detrimental, which they shouldn't in any case.
Absolutely. And, the issue with that is that he who takes the benefit and the privilege bears the burden. So once you receive that benefit or that privilege, now you're on the hook just like a fish. And I always say that, the government or these people who are out here trying to induce you into these contracts are fishermen of men. And once they get you on the hook and you don't know how to reappropriate those rights, titles, and interests, they're going to reel you in, and then they may just turn you into dinner. So be careful.
So the steps are returning documentation to the people that we know to be holders in due course, as we might say. And that puts it back in the trustee's hand, the actual trustees. And that's what I was talking about earlier with the expenses incidental to transfer of title. It's that chain of title we've established that we agree that title is in the wrong hands.
Yep. And here's another little tidbit that most people don't understand, because we've been taught to, take these titles and hang them on our wall like a badge of honor, and don't realize that they're really, they're not doing their justice for us. So you're supposed to take these titles, perfect your interest in them, and then give them back to where they came from, because he who holds the title is liable. And I realize I don't want to be liable for these things. So let me give these titles back, like what you were saying about the surrender, right? And getting rid of that sir and shipping it back to where it belongs, because it's a warehouse receipt, and there's no account of the real owner or, the real beneficiary per se, right? So because no one has been accounted for, the state is coming in and they're acting like they're the real beneficiary and that they're the grantor of this, whatever it is that we're talking about, when in reality, they're not the real grantor. No more than, if you hired somebody to come to your house and build something for you, yeah, sure, they put it together, but they did it on your command or, based upon your wishes or your will. So that doesn't make them the grantor of anything. When people, they really get mixed up in this game and they're like, well, it's the government's. Well,
Yeah, they're actually an intercessor that's intermeddling with your affairs without a just right or cause.
yeah, absolutely. And if you don't step forward as the grantor on behalf of the beneficiary, they don't need to know, the beneficiary is private. Okay, so we never have to disclose who the beneficiary is, but we're always acting as the grantor on behalf of the principal and interest, and on behalf of the beneficiary.
And
So if
what
we can figure out how to get back into that grantor position, now we can start reappropriating those rights, titles, and interests so that the beneficiary's needs can be taken care of.
Well, and one of the ways we, in my interpretation, again, in regards to transferring that title to the Postal Service at the end of the line there, that's putting the title in the hand of the registered agent already. The United States Postal Service is the registered agent for things posted. And again, the action of taking private data elements and abstracting them and putting them into legal and commercial documentation for as an instrumentality is what's known as posting. So it's creating a ledger from a private journal.
Yep, absolutely. Creating a superior record that we can stand on, and then the post office or the postmaster general becomes the trust protector, right? And that's where our enforcement comes into play. And this is where a lot of people miss the mark and they fail in their endeavor. It's because they do an administrative process, but they don't know how to enforce it,
Right.
right?
And this is the firm mailing manual, firm mailing book. You end up with a firm mailing book where everything is entered into a ledger. And the Postal Service is the one obligated to keep the balance of the ledger.
Yeah, and you become the postmaster general of your post. So that ledger is really incumbent upon you so that you can bring forth your superior record, and then you can take it to to the trust protector, and then he can enforce those rights that you have secured, because you only have the rights that you have secured and brought with you. Okay. And rights means obligations, duties, and obligations. So once you've done your duty and obligation and you've brought forth equity, the other party has no choice but to perform the same way. When you get up and you go to work and you put in 40 hours and you put in the sweat equity. Well, that sweat equity works. Why wouldn't real equity work, on the other side of the aisle? And that's where people always get, their lack of faith comes into play, because they're always like, well, how do you know it's going to work? I'm like, well, how do you know sweat equity works? Okay. And they're like, well, because I go to work. And I'm like, exactly. I put in the work. I brought forth the equity. I've done my duty. Okay. And here it is. Now, what do you have to say?
Right.
So
See,
work
that's the
the same way.
yeah, and see that's the part they have a hard time dismissing, is that the equity in rightly dividing the word of truth. When you have a failed system or a fault in the system, um, it goes to the integrity, and that's what they're bound to. Is that if they're truly operating as a government, they have to have both transparency and integrity.
Yes.
They're,
And they have to remain in honor just like you did.
good faith and fair dealings. That's the credit of the nation. So
Well,
again, it's coming down to that chain of title and transferring the title to the right hands, which I've been expressing is the post office. And that's that Jeremiah 51:31. One post shall run to another post, messenger to messenger, shewing unto the king of Babylon that the city has fallen at the other end. That's where you're stopping the lies, the babble. You're going to stop all of that. Say it's done. It's over with. I'm bringing the truth. And I'm doing it in an equal station of life, one post to another.
yes. And now they can't look down on you, from a high vantage point, and have the high ground on you. Now you're on equal footing, right? And what is that? When equities are equal, they must follow the law.
Correct. Equity will take jurisdiction where there's a multiplicity of suits, and where there is an equality in equity, then it must follow the law.
And then when they don't want to follow the law, now they fall into commercial dishonor. And the same way that you can be punished for, or compelled into performance for your dishonor, you know, they fall under the same guy, you know.
Right, and that's that equity imputes an intent to fulfill an obligation. So fulfill the obligation, transfer the title to the proper holder. Now they have to fill their obligation. Their obligation is the balancing of the ledger. They're the posters. I'm
They
not
have
an imposter.
they have to preform the same way you would be compelled to preform.
Yep, absolutely. And what about you also brought something forward as far as the selective service and going back to your civilian authority by shedding off of that contract through uh, a record correction and an address change. Can you talk about that?
Well, once I did the surrender, I had a friend on one of the platforms, and he was talking about doing a change of address and stuff. And I was kind of, at first, like anything else, you hear it, you don't really truly understand how it fits into the bigger picture. But once I got my post office box, I started, trying to experiment with doing some changes of address. And so I changed the address from the place that I surrendered it to my P.O. box. And it took me about 5 times to get it right. I got a little
And
discouraged.
we're talking about the selective service address.
No, we're not talking about that one. You can change that one right online. Like you can, on one of the little options, you can change the address. And then once you do, you print it out, the new printout, and then you send it in to confirm into their registry that the address is solidified. All right.
And that's where
But
you change it to your PO box.
yes, you change it
Okay.
to your P.O. box. But as far as the other one, on the 5th time, I finally got it right. And then when I got it back, the only part that I did wrong was I tried to change it to the physical address of the post office. And the postmaster he basically said, I've made a correction. He changed the way that the business styled, the way that I styled it, corrected it for me. And then he said, do not use the physical address of the post office. It needs to reflect the P.O. box. And I was like, oh, okay. So once I did that, there was a couple other addresses that I changed, and I got confirmation of those. And then I started learning a little bit about, the selective service, because I didn't really know how that tied in, and I'd never really even gotten online before to even see if I had a selective service number, because my mother told me that, she refused to told us not to. And I had no recollection of even signing up for it. But when I got on there, I found out that, one way or the other, that I had been registered for selective service.
Right.
So
And that's let me explain real quick. Ladies and gentlemen, you go to the post office to sign up for selective service. And I believe you give them an address form. They require you to give out an address form so they know your adult address currently, or they have you verify one that you might have put in previously that you're still at. But they verify your address and you sign up for selective service at the post office.
yes, you do. So I went and I found, I got on the website, put in my information, and then it printed up, it showed me my selective service. So there's a little button you can click, and then you can get a PDF, and I printed it up. And at first, I didn't really know how to change the address. I didn't know you could do it online. So I tried to mark it out, or, put my executive stamp on there to change the address. That didn't really work. And then as I was kind of going through the website, I found it's like from the left, on the top left, they'll have a series of, different things that you can click. And like the second one, when you scroll down, there's an option in there where you can literally change it right there online. And then I got a new printout, and then I filled it out accordingly, where it says at the top to sign it, and then down at the bottom. And I understood that, when you detach these things from each other, you're severing a bond. So I didn't detach it when I sent it in. And I put a stamp on the front at the top, and then I put a stamp on the bottom right at the back. And I got the postmaster to stamp it in red. And because of the things that I've done,
And
and
what he's talking about, folks, is that the selective service registrant form that we're talking about that you get from them comes with the portion that you can detach at the bottom, just like a coupon on a billing statement or something. And so rather than detaching it, you you have the option, like he said earlier, sending it back to them with some corrections to be amended, and then they'll send you a new one. Then upon the new one, then you detach that bottom part, correct?
You can. They sent me two of them, but it's the
Okay.
top part. Okay, on their printout, it's not the bottom part that you sent in. The bottom part
Right.
it says to keep this
Is
part
your
for your
evidence.
wallet.
Right.
Right.
It's for your own evidence so that while they're making corrections, you still have the basic information.
Correct. So it's the top part. So I didn't detach it at all because I knew that that breaks the chain of title, right? And these things are a bond. So I just gave it its consideration, and I went up to the post office and I showed them my credentials, which is my oath of office, and I had them stamp it in red, not in black, right?
Correct.
And so they stamped both sides, and then I signed it as the president. And then it occurred to me once again, the last shall be the first, and then the first shall be the last. So at the top, I signed it the last name, first name, middle initial, and then put my blue thumbprint on there. And I signed it as, the president, meaning I'm president, right, over this identity. And down there at the bottom, I signed it by first, middle initial, and last. So I just expressed the trust, just like, when they say the president's name, sometimes they'll say President Donald J. Trump, and then other times they'll say President Trump. So I
Right.
express it in that manner at the top. The last shall be the first, and down there at the bottom, the last or the first shall be the last. Right. So chain of title once again, and then I put it in, first class mail, and I sent it into the selective service, and then I got a response back, which was the most amazing thing. And they made some alterations to it that were pretty profound. If you hadn't done the things that I've done, but prior to that, the prerequisites, you probably wouldn't get back the same results that I got. Okay. But
Right. So
nonetheless, they still, from what I've been told, a few of my friends said that they sent theirs in, they got a response, but they didn't get back what I got. Right.
right.
So,
So it's a matter of the response is the process. And again, it's a matter of understanding those contract elements and making a document valid.
well, it's meeting certain requirements, like the very first thing that anyone should do before they go out and get their estate EIN or if they do anything is the surrender. Okay. Just like when we're doing an algebraic equation, there's an order of operations to things. Sure, you could do them out of order and you may wind up getting the right answer at the end, right? But you'll miss key elements to be able to plug things in, right? That's why it's
Right.
always, I've known a lot of people growing up and in class, they could just come up with the answer to something, but they wouldn't be able to do the order of operations on the board in order to express it. So they teach you
Okay.
that to learn how to express the trust, whether you know that or not. Right.
Okay. So let's talk about the first order of operation, which we've discussed as the birth certificate and surrendering it. Um, what's what's the deal on the authentication and apostille from your perspective and experience so far?
Okay. Well, I had a friend, there's been a lot of people who, not necessarily my mentors, but, I have a very keen ear for buzzwords. And when they say buzzwords, I will go and look these things up. And then from that, I get keen insight. And he said to me, letters patent. And I said, well, what is a letters patent? And so I went and looked it up. And then there's a little reference on Wikipedia. And it basically says that, it's an appointment to office to a president or to a governor or governor general over the Commonwealth or a royal commission. And that, the America has developed a modern day letters patent, which is basically grants exclusive rights over intellectual property or over what they call a utility patent. And then it occurred to me, I said, oh, a utility patent. Oh, they're talking about a transmitting utility, right?
Transmitting utility 19 USC 81N as it relates to 19 USC 81O resident. No person shall reside within the zone except federal, state, or municipal officers or agents whose resident presence is deemed necessary by the board. And when you consider yourself a resident and put that forth as part of the data elements and all these applications and everything, without understanding this, you become that very transmitting utility. You are being utilized for transmitting data elements from your private journal so that they can ledger them and use them against you in a value system.
Yes, and to extract your energy through your sweat equity, right? You become their tool in essence, right? You become the nail, and then they hammer you over the head with it. So, you know, you want to perfect your interest in this, in this transmitting utility so that you can fulfill your office. All right. You can do a surrender and not perfect those things. And all that will happen is that you will establish that there's a grantor, okay, and that the beneficiary is known. But you will never fulfill your appointment to office because it requires that letters patent in order for you to fulfill that appointment to office. And what is that appointment to office? Well, that is the head, not the tail. That's the executive office, right? That's where that ident comes into play because you're present over this. You're identifying that you're not the res anymore of the trust, like identify the res, that you are present and to be accounted for. Right. So you can't fulfill that appointment to office without it. In any office, okay, like an executive office, if you've ever read your estate's probate code, it says in there that there are instances where an executor requires a bond, right? So I was reading my estate's probate code and I said, well, most everybody I ever known that has been appointed as executor, they didn't have to put a bond in place. And then it said that there are exceptional cases. And I said, oh, so now we're talking about the private side. So that's when I realized that, this letters patent is my appointment to office. And what are the elements to fulfill an office? Well, if you ever went down and pulled someone's oath of office and got their whole appointment, there will be 2 oaths in there. There's usually one to the Constitution, and then there's a anti-bribery statement, okay? And then there is a power of attorney, and then there's a bond. Okay, so it took me about, almost a year to really get this because I was at a point where I was like, I don't want to go any further until I figure out what it means to fulfill my executive office. I've got a principal place of business. I've got my stuff here all at the post office now. Now, what do I need to do to fulfill this office? So I went down and I did my amnesty oath, right? Where it talks about in the Trading with the Enemies Act. And I did a reproclamation restating, Proclamation 179 that was restated by Andrew Johnson after Lincoln was killed. And then I put my power of attorney on the record because I had already surrendered the bond for the office and met my requirement to be appointed. I just now needed to put the other elements on the record to fulfill that office.
And the amnesty oath, folks, is a statement of equal station. You're in agreement with the laws of the United States, this and that, and how they operate. And you're going to do your part. It's not that you are an official, but in an equal station in life, you perform similar functions. So functionally, you will uphold the law, but officially, you are not an agent nor an officer.
No, you're not. And also part of that is, ratifying your peace treaty, coming to peace, right? That you are going to protect the widows and the orphans and that you're not going to go to war anymore. Because the presumption is that ever since the Civil War that the American people, or at least the Southerners that the provisional government was put over, are still enemy combatants. Right. And in the Trading with the Enemies Act, it says that all the southern states, if you were born in one of those states that were part of the rebellion, that it's mandatory. But I would say you should do it anyways, just to ratify your peace treaty so that they can't make any presumption otherwise, right? Non-combative, peaceful sojourner.
Right. Not only that, but understand as parents, it's going to be much more successful to go forth in these modern times and having um, bearing more children in being able to understand how it operates so that you can either work with it or, like we're posing here, work with it with an equal station and provide an estate for that child on the public side while acknowledging a public estate in case mom and dad somehow pass on and society then has to take care of their child. So it's just a preparatory system is all it is, based on insurances and looking out for the community good and eminent domain and stuff. But it's based on the fact that they presume us all to be foundlings, all those abandoned and wards of the state, you know, coming from barren, coming from widows and stuff, and not having a true patriarch in our life. So just like the thumbnail says before, it's not a matter of trying to identify with who you are, but what God created you to be. Jeremiah 1:5, before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee. Before thou camest forth from the womb, I sanctified thee. I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations. This is our freedom of expression in our talents, no matter what our talent is. When it comes to these legal and commercial documentations, for crying out loud, think how simple it is. They say you can just put an X for your signature. If it's that simple, then what does that X really mean? What kind of stock does it really hold in it?
That's where the treasure is located. It's either your point of death or you found the treasure. You know, it's either or, depending upon you. On your, like you say, in your status and your standing in life. What is your post? You know, what were
Yep.
you sent here to do? You know, I was sent to fulfill my post duties, you know, and to be seated at the table that my father has prepared for me. So, you know, I've come back from my, you know, from being lost at sea back to the port of birth to fulfill that post and to honor thy mother and father and to do what the Father has sent me, you know, has always had in store for me to do from the very start before I even came here. It was written in the book, or I wouldn't be, you know, at the point that I'm at now because, you know, I didn't
Well,
just find this stuff, you know, it kind of found me.
yeah, that's a large part of it as well. You know, the parable of the talents. We're not supposed to be burying our talents. We're supposed to be going forth with them. That's why I mentioned that, our talents. And then the parable of the prodigal son. You know, when we're out there sharing our talents and indentured into somebody else, when we do return to our state, see, that's the intent. We can go out amongst society. We can be involved. We can get those licenses and stuff. We just have to understand what they are and learn how to contract it for that equal consideration, equal benefit, like I said, so we don't become slaves to that society and are not able to return to our estate.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and you need to make sure that you know, you don't do things that are going to prevent you from being able to come back to that state, you know, because God may forgive you for certain things, but society won't. Right.
Correct. And this is an important part of the thing about giving a man a fish. You feed him for a day, but if you teach him to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. And the principle of that is that my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. So the true benefit there is not the fish, but the education he got, so then he can turn around and teach others. Because again, the greatest gift is the intangible, not the material world. And that's what we hold so dear to ourselves, is the materialism, when that's not the reality.
You can gain the whole world and lose your soul. And that's a scary thought, you know, once you really understand what that means. So,
Well, yeah, the scripture says something about that. Let me see. Um, what is it? Where was it?
And while you're looking that up, when I say lose your soul, the worldly representation of that is the sole of your feet, where you're grounded.
Matthew, yeah, Matthew 16:26. For what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? That's part of this whole thing. I don't care anything about this materialistic world. I really don't.
No, because you can't take all these things to the kingdom of heaven with you. I've decided there's another scripture in there where Jesus says, give it all up and follow me. And I've realized that on my journey here that I have had to lose everything in order to so that I can get it all back, but in a completely different manner. So, if you get to a point in your life where you're losing all those things, if you just would let go of those things, God's true purpose can be revealed for you. And then you get all the kingdom of heaven. And you can't take worldly things with you to the kingdom of heaven,
Yeah, yeah. Once there's that communication, and it's set in your heart, you're a righteous being, and you do ask for forgiveness, and you do go through that repentance, and you do go through that self-reflection, so that you can maintain control of yourself and know thyself, and educate thyself, being an observer and a doer, and not just someone that runs around running their mouth and posing all kinds of knowledge and stuff. That's fine and dandy, but if you don't have the good works, then your faith doesn't mean shit.
No, it doesn't. And actions speak louder than words. So I know I talk a lot and I say a lot of things, but I only try to talk about things that I've done or that I'm in the process of doing. And a superior man stays in his domain. So, I stay in that lane. A lot of people probably think I'm full of it, but I always can bring forth the evidence to prove the things that I've done. And sometimes I can't explain to you how I came to it, but nonetheless, I can show it to you, and I can tell you what I did to get there, but every man's path is a little bit different. And, where you're at and where you're from it will decide on what those what those things look like, because every state has different, the way that they conduct business and express the trust is differently, but
Right.
nonetheless the principles are the same, but the methods are many.
And when it comes to that trust and the way it's expressed, again, that enumeration at birth, the minimum standards for that enumeration is that it's supposed to be registered in the United States. This is indicative of give unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar. If it's supposed to belong to Caesar, then give it to Caesar. In that, it tells us that the judicial officer department is a neutral and independent form within the United States Postal Service, who happens to be the registered agent. So give it to them. They're the ones that manage the Postal Service Board of Contracts.
Well,
Seems reasonable logic to me.
you can give it to the registrar and then you can do a change of address and move it to the post.
Right.
Right, because we have to remove custodialship from them and then bring it into our ship, because right now it's on their ship. Right, it's being held as cargo in a warehouse. So once we give it back, then we can use the post office to change, have the cargo in essence basically move
Right.
from their ship to our ship, which is now our principal place of business.
Right. And it's a rerouting. That's all we're doing. It's a routing, and it's a data clearinghouse, automated clearinghouse of data elements. And we reroute the data elements, and it's clearing. And we don't have to worry about the automated clearinghouse of the financial, because that's taken within. That's the balancing of that ledger I keep talking about. They're the ones responsible for it.
And the beautiful part more than anything is once you do your duty, and if you've perfected it, it secures all liens. All liens become secured by real estate.
Right. And it
So
becomes, it kind of like, along with that amnesty oath, it kind of comes preemptive as a full acquittance and discharge, where no person shall be held liable in any court, so long as the interests of the United States and the account of the United States are being upheld, and for the party making the same,
yeah, they can't.
maintaining that equal consideration.
They can no longer move on anything. It puts an estoppel to any administrative court coming and taking something that you have in your name. Even your
Because
mortgage to your house, they can no longer come and take it from you because it's been secured by that state of affairs, right?
right, and it's the judicial officer department, that neutral and independent forum. It's already set up. They just have to have that title.
And here's the best part, okay? What most people don't know is that on the private side, they're claiming that you owe a debt, that a portion of the national debt. Now, it could be, it could be, now we know that's kind of a joke, right? But nonetheless, this is the standing that they're standing on. And it seems to be true as long as you're on the wrong side of the fence. So when you do these things and you give it back, it actually settles your portion of the national debt. And you do just like when John F. Kennedy said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And what it does is it takes that portion of that debt and it settles it for you, which removes your portion of the hardship that you've created in regards to that number. Okay. And then it credits you in the process of doing it. Okay. And then it secures all of those other liens so that no one can come in and administer anything on your behalf without your express written permission. They could posture and bolster up and do all that stuff. But if they go any further than that, then they're trespassing. And they could be held for executive trust on tort, because by what delegation of authority do you have to administer anything on my behalf? They don't have it anymore.
Right. And it's not, again, it's in that judicial branch with the judicial determination that is bound by contract now, because it's established through an account holding with the post office. That's a private contract, folks. You have an independent contract with the post office, and you're routing everything through them as the trustee to manage the accounts. Oh, yeah. The administration can no longer interfere. They don't have the authority. That's not an executive branch or legislative branch decision anymore.
That falls under special maritime admiralty. And
Judicial declaration.
they don't trespass on that. They know better. But that is the real government. Those mosquitoes were eating me alive
And,
out.
it's King James Version 328, Galatians, Acts 10:34, both say the same thing. In Christ, all children have value, purpose, and access to truth. And so the whole premise here is, again, that Hosea 4:6, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Therefore, the true benefit is the knowledge, and that's what we should be giving to our children. That's the premise of all this research and everything, is that our children are not being taught what they need to know in accordance to the estate, how it works, the personage, the personhood. We're being raised to be and indoctrinated into believing we are the person, when that's the distinction that needs to be clarified. So
Absolutely.
that's what we're working on with this, folks. And I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. Yisay, we're going to take off and head out our own ways again, but I want to do this on a regular basis. So, and I know we both have a lot of information. So let's plan on doing this again another night. Give people another hour of some more information of what we're doing in law, and not just reading and writing about.
All right. I'm all about that. So just let me know when the time and the place, and I'll do my best to be there.
Absolutely. Appreciate it. And you got anything on the way out?
Just be vigilant, and don't give up, and when you make up your mind to do something, follow through on it. you know, and have faith. That's really what's important. You know, let no one discourage you or tell you otherwise, you know, because I'm living proof that, you know, when you do what you're supposed to do, it works, you know,
Yep.
and equity begets equity. So on that, that's about all I have to say. And I appreciate you, Keith, for having me on.
You bet. We'll see you again next time. And you guys know me. I love you, but I don't give a rat's ass whether you love me back. That's to say, I don't care if you hate me. I don't care if you don't respect me. That's on you. So make sure you hit the like, share, and subscribe button. There's a PayPal link in it for anybody that wants to share some love. And if you're one of those ones that doesn't respect me or hates me, may God bless you. We'll see y'all next time. Thanks again.